Usted estuvo en París, ¿verdad? Usted no fue a Guatemala. Daniel Rodolfo, no más mentiras. Aquí dice en el estado de cuenta. Usted viajó hace 15 días a París y se gastó $8,000 en una tienda de tecnología.
¿Qué?
Y mira al niño en lo que trabaja. ¡Qué pecado!
Para evitar fraudes, ahora puede reportar su viaje y recibir notificaciones de sus compras desde la app Davivienda. Así de fácil. Davivienda, una multilatina en El Salvador.
Muy buenas noches, amigos televidentes, bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de FOCOS y de su segmento Zoom. Nuevas respuestas para la prevención del delito de los jóvenes y para su reinserción en la sociedad. Este es el tema que nos ocupa esta noche. Desde el año 2009, la principal causa de menores de edad en conflicto con la ley es el delito de agrupaciones ilícitas. Según la Unidad de Justicia Juvenil del órgano judicial, en el año 2011 había 6.113 personas menores de 18 años sometidas a la jurisdicción penal juvenil, principalmente por agrupaciones ilícitas, el 13.4%, por extorsión, el 12.5%, robo agravado, el 11.8% y homicidio agravado, el 11.6%. Para el año 2012, había un total de 1.036 personas de 18 años bajo resguardo en los centros de inserción social. El principal delito por el cual los y las adolescentes son atendidos en el área de reinserción social son los homicidios, 35.2%, y las extorsiones, 30.1%. Sin embargo, según UNICEF, la mayoría de los delitos en el país, 8 de cada 10, son cometidos por adultos y no por adolescentes, contrario al imaginario público. Durante el año 2014 fueron 67.440 los adultos imputados por delitos cometidos frente a 8.240 adolescentes que fueron imputados para ese mismo año. La atención ciudadana está más centrada en la violencia generada por adolescentes, en detrimento de las causas y condiciones que las producen. Se busca castigar al adolescente, no prevenir que incursionen en el delito o crear condiciones para su reinserción a la sociedad. Varios expertos nacionales e internacionales han señalado que tanto el sistema de persecución y acusación penal del delito, como sobre todo el sistema carcelario para los jóvenes, son verdaderas fábricas de asesinos. Para explorar nuevas respuestas para la prevención del delito de los jóvenes y para su reinserción a la sociedad, hemos invitado a dos miembros de la Delegación de Contextos que viene desde Chicago para conocer los programas que impulsa en El Salvador. Vamos a tener esta entrevista en inglés con traducción simultánea en el texto. Le damos la bienvenida a Kathy Hill y a Marlena Jentz. Welcome.
Thank you.
Kathy Hill es directora de Políticas, Investigación y Desarrollo en la Procuraduría Estatal del Condado de Cook, abogada de la Escuela de Leyes de la Universidad de Chicago, que ha pasado su carrera legal trabajando en temas relacionados con el sistema de justicia criminal. Marlena Jentz es directora de Programas Alternativos y Educacionales en el Departamento de Correccionales del Condado de Cook, graduada en Ciencias Políticas y Estudios Internacionales en la Universidad de San Luis, con maestría de Políticas Públicas de la Universidad de Chicago. Okay, well, it's nice to have you in this program. What are you here for?
We were invited here on behalf of Contextos, and we've come to observe all of the good work that's being done here, and also learn from some of the good work being done here, and also take in some of the things that we can work together on. And I just want to thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. I echo that. Thank you for having us. We have been visiting
prison facilities and juvenile reinsertion facilities here in El Salvador to see comparisons between what we're seeing in Chicago. I think there are a lot of similarities between Chicago and El Salvador, and as Marlena said, to learn.
This is your first time in El Salvador.
Yes.
Explain to us, and especially for the public, for the audience, your work, your specific work in Chicago.
Sure. So I work for the county sheriff. The sheriff oversees the largest single-site jail in the country. The population when I started working there about 5 years ago was around 12,000 individuals in his custody, with 10,000 of them in our jail. Now it is down to 6,000 people in our jail. And my work in the facility is to oversee programming. So I work particularly in the areas of education, substance use services, insurance enrollment, and a variety of other initiatives to try and keep people's minds active and also draw down the violence within the facility and prepare them for re-entry into society.
So I work for the prosecutor in Cook County, the second largest prosecutor's office in the country, in the United States. We employ over 750 lawyers whose job it is to prosecute crime. So Marlena's work deals with the Cook County Jail. Almost all of the people in the jail are awaiting trial. They are pre-sentence. We are the prosecutors who will prosecute those cases, and then if they are convicted, they will go to state prison facilities after conviction.
What is the relevance of Chicago and your work in particular for El Salvador today?
Well, I think there's a lot of commonalities that we can see between what's going on here and what's going on in Chicago, particularly as we're both trying to address the question of mass incarceration. And I think in that end, there's a lot that we can share and a lot that we can learn from each other about how to prepare young people to re-enter society and not do so and return to the communities and commit violent crimes.
I think Chicago and El Salvador are both experiencing in real time a real crisis of violence. Chicago has experienced a real spike in homicides and shootings. Notably in 2016, we had over a 25% increase in shootings and homicides, which obviously puts us in a very difficult position and raises lots of questions about how we're going to address the challenge. So I think the exchange between two jurisdictions that are experiencing these things in real time is critically important. This is not, oh, we dealt with this 10 years ago. We're both dealing with these issues right now.
In a nutshell, what are the causes, or the main causes of this increase in delinquency or in homicides, etc.?
We see a tremendous increase in gang-related conflict and interpersonal conflict that's driving violence. We see a lot of retaliatory violence. So one shooting will beget another shooting as people try to retaliate for what has happened. But really, these are interpersonal conflicts, often among gang-affiliated young people.
I would also add, and Katie's absolutely right, I would also add that, a failure to address mental health and trauma in our communities, and also a need to address poverty. So these are all important factors that are contributing to that type of violence that are driving up.
I understand that you visit yesterday and today 3 prisons. What are your first impressions and findings?
Well, I was in, one of the first prisons that we went to was an adult facility, and my immediate impression was to learn a lot from some of the programmatic offerings that are being put on there, and some things that I could take away from that. But in addition to that, one of the things that I was startled by was the number of individuals there and the number of staff on site. It's very different than the way it is in Chicago, and I took a lot away from
Meaning
that
a lot
ratio.
of prisoners and little staff.
Correct.
Yeah, I think we saw the Yo Cambio program yesterday, and seeing the programming that is being done where prisoners are teaching each other and trying to use the skills and talents that they have to make their time in prison more productive and like Marlena said, to keep their minds active, I think is really instructive for us as we think about what we could be doing better.
What are the underlying reasons for your involvement in criminal behavior in Chicago? Is this phenomenon on the rise, and why? You already explained some of that, but why professionals like you are interested to go into this difficult, complex, tough job? How do you choose to play this role in society?
Honestly, it's a question my family asks me all of the time. I think one of the reasons, and there's a couple, but one of the reasons why I got involved is quite frankly, I think a measure of a just society is how you treat the most vulnerable. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in our own society. And I also think that we can only improve it one step at a time. And I guess by that I mean it takes one person changing another person's life to kind of change the system. And I can see that groundswell and that change coming in Chicago.
Yeah, for me, this is work I've done my whole legal career. I think that the toll that violence takes on communities just cannot be overstated. It's incredibly damaging to families, to communities, to the people themselves, and obviously to the victims. And we clearly haven't figured out how to fully address that and how to address that harm. And trying to be a part of the solutions is something that I'm called to.
The normal response to these tragedies are repression, nor prevention. Not the societies in general and the state in particular doesn't normally focus on how to prevent youth to become delinquents or how to reinsert them in society. And I understand that is precisely the innovative work that you are doing in Chicago, and hopefully you will share some of this experience with us here. A lot of people are saying this in El Salvador, that there is too much repression and too little prevention. What are your comments on that? Or what, in your opinion, should be the institutional response in order to reduce youth involvement and participation in illegal activities?
In my experiences in Chicago, and this has proven true here in El Salvador as well, if you speak to people who you find in prison who have committed crimes, every single one of them has experiences in their childhood, in their young adulthood, that have been deeply traumatic and very, very difficult, without exception. And so I would argue that if you are really going to make a difference in addressing violence, you must consider prevention as part of the universe of solutions. Obviously, there will need to be some response. If there is a violent event, there needs to be some law enforcement response. But unless you're also taking into account what is bringing people to this place, you're never going to have a complete solution.
Yes, but you have been, you have a society or a community and your counterparts in the state that has been open for this approach. And in addition to that, there are a lot of resources that you have, that the state has, even civil society, NGOs, etc., to address this change of paradigm, I will say. That is not the case in countries with El Salvador, with a tradition of repression, of authoritarianism, and in which a lot of people think that the way to deal with that is with iron hand, mano dura, and not with this prevention stuff.
Well, I think the reality is, and not to go back to this again, but it really does start with one person at a time. And so I think we can't expect systemic change and the prevention of this kind of approach to happen overnight. And you're right, we have the building blocks in Chicago to build from, and we've been very fortunate in the last number of years to have the political will to build from. I also think, though, that there are some things in El Salvador that it's important to start recognizing and calling attention to. And one of them is the importance of trauma-involved care. And cognitive behavioral therapy is a big tool that we use to try and address that type of trauma. And I think that is the building blocks that you guys could use in El Salvador to address these types of issues.
But, I mean, you spoke about political will. I think part of the reason you see the political will in the United States and in Chicago is we have evidence that suggests that being only repressive doesn't work, right? Most of the people who go into prison in the United States come back out, particularly juveniles. There are shorter sentences for juveniles, as I understand there are here too. And the evidence suggests that juveniles who spend more time incarcerated are more likely to recidivate, are more likely to reoffend than those who spend less time inside. So even just at a very basic level, if what we're trying to do is address violence, there's no evidence that suggests that we're getting safer by incarcerating kids and being tougher. And there's some pretty persuasive evidence in Chicago to suggest that it actually makes kids more likely to become more involved, more violent, more sort of committed to criminality than they would if they didn't go in.
Well, but you have research in universities that support that thesis, that understanding. You have probably columnists in the media that will support that. I don't know, probably the church also. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have civil society, you have the academia, you have other, state officials that encourage this new approach. If not, you will not be working there. Is that right or not?
I don't think that, I still don't think there's universal agreement that this is the way to go. I work with law enforcement quite a lot. I would not say that there's uniform agreement among law enforcement or among the public that being more focused on prevention is necessarily the way to go. There's still quite a lot of support for a more strict and repressive approach. And I think you're seeing building momentum because you're right, there has been this research. And I think an emphasis on research and data and trying to understand what are the impacts of what we're doing right now is critically important to building that understanding and that political will to at least try things a slightly different way.
Vamos a hacer una pausa, ya regresamos.
¿Cuánto dinero necesitas? Descubre Multimoney, créditos fácil de tramitar y rápidos de desembolsar, desde $350 hasta $11,000, sin trámites adicionales, sin fiador y sin orden de descuento. En 24 horas tendrás tu cheque en tu casa u oficina. Tendrás entre 48 o 60 meses plazo y puedes pagar de lunes a domingo. Pagar es sencillo, sin fila y con horarios extendidos. Multimoney, tu crédito al instante. Búscanos en nuestra página web y calcula tu cuota.
El fútbol es mi pasión. Desde niño quise estar en las grandes ligas y me esforcé por lograrlo. Entrenando y estudiando a través de internet, mirando y practicando las jugadas de los mejores futbolistas del mundo.
5 megas, línea fija y un Smart TV Samsung de 43 pulgadas. Todo incluido por $40 al mes.
Soy Darwin Serén y soy parte de la nueva generación de El Salvador.
Nuevas respuestas para la prevención del delito de los jóvenes y para su reinserción en la sociedad es el tema que nos ocupa esta noche, conversando con Katie Hill y Marlena Jentz, dos norteamericanas, dos profesionales que trabajan en programas de prevención precisamente en Chicago y que han venido acá con una delegación de contextos para compartir sus propias experiencias y también aprender de la situación en El Salvador. Continuamos esta entrevista en inglés con subtítulos en español. Before going to the post, you mentioned that these prevention programs, that you are involved in these prevention programs, and I would like to know in a more specific way how to go about this.
So we have many programs in Cook County that are alternative prosecution programs or diversion programs, where somebody who is arrested and potentially charged with a crime, instead of being prosecuted and sent to prison, is diverted or deflected into community programming, into some level of court oversight that keeps them at home, onto probation.
But that depends on the crime.
It does depend somewhat on the crime, but we have a wide range of offenses that for which people are eligible, and different ranges of oversight depending on the seriousness of the crime and the background of the person. So, somebody who just steals something of very low value, who has no criminal history, might just get to go home. somebody who has done something more serious, who has some criminal history, might be checking in with a court officer regularly who is making sure that they're following the rules. There's different levels and stages.
That doesn't exist here.
We've seen, yeah, so I think one key difference, there's a lot that we've seen that's in common. One key difference is there does not seem to exist the opportunity to keep people in community and to have community-based treatment and case management for young people.
I think another major factor for me particularly is that once young people are getting into the correctional facility, we know that we only saw a fraction of the people that are in correctional facilities here in El Salvador on our 2 days here. And so we know that there are a lot of people that are not in that type of programming and not getting those kinds of offerings. And so the Cook County Sheriff has taken a very progressive approach and taken a look at what types of interventions really work to prevent people from coming back into his facility. And some of those preventive measures have to focus around mental health and assessments of somebody's trauma level before they enter the facility to make sure that they're housed in the correct location. It is a wide-ranging initiatives in terms of educational services, be it high school services all the way up until college classes. We have a tilapia farm, we have a garden, and we have a number of other initiatives that we are actually seeing a decrease in incidents as a result of these programmatic initiatives, some around anti-violence as well. And when the incidents go down, it makes life easier for the staff on site as well, and it makes them individuals less likely to return.
Sounds like a dream. We've never seen anything like that in this country. It's a matter of approach, but it's also, I will assume it's a matter of resources, and that is a big challenge. Are there other successful models in the world that you know that don't involve increasing sentences and incarceration, and that have developed other routes to ensuring future reinsertion into society? What are successful models in other states or in other communities in the U.S. or abroad that you know about them?
I would just like to first start and talk about our Supportive Release Center. So in partnership with a couple of other community agencies, and again, these are resources that we're very fortunate to have that we recognize may not exist here in El Salvador. The Supportive Release Center takes individuals who are leaving the custody of the sheriff and leaving the jail, returning to community but don't actually have a place to live. And they're given a residence for a period of 24 to 36 hours, and they're able to stay there, and they're assigned a case manager, and they are also linked to resources so that there's a step-by-step process to re-enter society. And we've seen that be very successful so far.
But in Chicago, it's
Correct.
So I think if you look around the United States, and I'm most familiar with the United States, there are a lot of exciting models that other states are trying around the diversion and deflection that I'm describing. So I think lots of people are grappling with questions of how to identify who's a good candidate for community-based deflection, what kinds of offenses, and then what kind of programming is effective at ensuring that they don't commit new offenses while they're released and don't become, recidivists, don't offend again. So I think we're learning a lot about how to address the mental health needs, how to address the trauma. There's a ton of substance abuse issues that play into this, and really trying to take on those root causes, the things that are driving people to commit crime while they're in the oversight of the courts, can really make a big difference in trying to make sure that they don't come back into the system.
And I think one of the things, and Katie's absolutely right, that is at the root of everything that she said is a risk assessment tool. I think throughout the country we're seeing a lot of people implementing a risk assessment tool as a means to identify somebody's greatest needs, but also their risk and likeliness of reoffending, and that helps us provide more targeted programming.
So there is risk analysis not only for financial matters, but also for probability of an individual to be involved in felony or crimes, etc.
Yeah, and this is not without controversy, right? Because you can't know what a person's going to do based on what other people like them have done. But there have been major efforts to look at historical data and model basically who is most likely to commit a new offense, who's most likely to commit a new violent offense if they're released. And those tools are now being used to help. They don't make the decisions. The tool doesn't decide. A judge still decides, but the tool helps the judge evaluate what is the appropriate, whether it's pretrial release or what is the appropriate sentence, or are they a good candidate for community-based treatment instead of incarceration.
And have a decision with instruments, a more objective instrument of analysis. No? In recent years, reforms have been introduced in the Legislative Assembly that establish, beginning at 14 years old, youth that commit crimes should be treated like adults and should be delivered to the adult justice system. What are the consequences, in your opinion, for a society when there is no differentiation for a youth population and an adult population with respect to sentencing and incarceration?
I will say that this is one place where the United States and El Salvador diverge. In the United States, the trend is absolutely moving in the other direction. What we know about brain development, what we know about adolescence, suggests that there are really differences between the brains of adolescents and the brains of adults that impact their ability to make decisions, their impulsivity, their how subject they are to group pressures, and that treating them all as the same group and all as the same set of symptoms just isn't effective. So in the United States, you're actually seeing a trend towards raising the age of juveniles, making it so that it used to be 17 in Illinois, now we say up to 18, and there's a movement to move that up to 19, 20, or even 21 in the juvenile system. I think when you have very young people who commit very serious crimes, which you have in El Salvador and which we have in Chicago, it's a very difficult question for society to figure out what to do with that. Because on the one hand, here you have a child, and someone who is 14 and 15 is really in many ways still a child, who's done something really grievously serious. But I think when we look at the evidence, we look at the brain science, we look at the data, there's not a lot to suggest that you're likely to make that person safer and rehabilitated by treating them as an adult, putting them in with a lot of other adults who have done really bad things, who are even deeper into criminality. That doesn't get us the outcomes we want. That doesn't make us safer. It doesn't make them less likely to reoffend.
I would simply say that the damage of that is irreparable. I think that putting somebody who's 14 years old together with an adult, we know from evidence-based practices that that's a bad way to go. We also know that the youth are going to adapt and absorb the practices of the adult. We know that that's not a good practice, and as Katie said, we're trying to go the other direction, and frankly, we have.
When punitive responses to crime are more and more severe, is criminality strengthened or reinforced, in your opinion?
It's probably not quite that linear.
Yeah.
But I think yes. I think there's some evidence to suggest that if the only response you have is mano duro, if the only response you have is very strong response and long sentences and strict penalties, people will respond to what you expect of them. And if what you are saying is what we expect of you is that you are a hardened criminal who's only capable of crime and we have to crack down, then that's what you'll get.
We keep talking about the juvenile justice system, but what is restorative juvenile justice? How can you define it? How do you define it?
So restorative justice is a philosophy that says that really the justice system, or that we should be focused on repairing harm. And so the principles of restorative justice suggest that we should focus our attention on how to make the victims of crime a part of the process of solution and really try to bring people together to restore the harm that has been done to them. That often involves practices like bringing people together around a table in a circle for a facilitated conversation where a victim gets to say and look in the eye, this is what you've done to me, this is the harm you've caused me, this is how you can make me feel whole based on what you've done to me. You know, you stole from me, here's how you can make amends. So instead of separating the person who's done the thing and taking them further away from their harm, where there's no real accountability, you never really have to face the person and
so
make
you
amends.
engage them.
You engage them. And I think there are folks who would say that's very powerful and actually can be real accountability in a way that you don't get when what you do is remove somebody from the context and put them far away and pretend it.
Do they put together the victims also?
Yes.
Face to face?
In the community, yes, but not necessarily in a correctional facility.
Yeah.
I would just add that restorative justice is based in a principle that we can't treat people like animals and expect them to behave like humans. So restorative justice is saying that we believe that everybody has value and that everybody has human dignity that we can restore. And
I assume
back.
that there are people that have criticized people like you, saying, you know, you are soft, you are dogs,
Yes.
you want to treat very well the criminals, and that will not give any results. I suppose there are people that doesn't believe in what you are doing.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people will say that we are soft on crime. And so I think that, that's a big question that we have to talk about, and I'll let Katie respond on her side of that, but I think that's a challenge, but I think that it's one that we can continue to push forward on. We talked a lot about the power of these programs and the power of drawing down violence, and so as long as we know that we have the evidence in our back pocket and we have the research to show that it's working, I think we can continue going in the right direction.
Just briefly, on restorative justice, you can't make a victim do it. The victim has to consent, right? And I think that's a really important principle, not just for restorative justice, but for the kinds of things we're talking about. The toll that violence takes on communities is so great, and so often the communities are not really participating in talking about the solutions. So we don't want to be soft on crime. We want to be effective. We want people to not reoffend. We want people to not commit crimes in the first place. And thinking more broadly about solutions, I think, is necessary because what we've been doing hasn't been working.
A final big question that probably you may answer in a more complete way next time that I will invite you to this program. But what could be done here to develop or implement this kind of justice system?
That is a big question.
How to start?
Well, I think one of the things is, to be honest with you, partnership. In Cook County, it's not all rosy. It's challenging at times, and there's a lot of political mess, as there is here sometimes. But partners like Katie and I, who are able to come together to see a kind of a creative solution to start building those building blocks, I think is the only way to go.
That's a huge question that's obviously impossible to answer very quickly, but in a really concrete way based on what we've seen, I would start with thinking about what you're doing to prepare young people who are going to come out of facilities, because you have a system that anticipates their release and not a lot of planning for what they're coming back to and what they're bringing with them in terms of skills and plans to make sure they don't go right back into a gang, that they don't reoffend right away. I would start with thinking about using those partnerships to plan specifically around that issue, because it's very present, it's very real.
And last one, probably more easy to answer. What institutional approach or mindset needs to change in order to respond to the underlying premises of this system? Is basically a point of departure is to change your mindset, your approach, your vision about how to go about this, or not?
Well, I think it goes back to your very good point about taking the tough approach. And I think that it starts with changing mindsets about being able to see that maybe loosening this grip isn't necessarily going to increase violence in communities, but in fact decrease it. And so that has to do with changing mentality.
I want to recognize the important role of Contextos, both in Chicago and here, and I am very pleased that people like you can come to El Salvador, can share your experiences, and can learn also from ours. And I believe that this communication, this dialogue, can be really very productive. I thank both of you for coming tonight.
Thank you
very much.
Y a ustedes, amigos televidentes, muchas gracias por su audiencia. No nos cambie, viene Prisma.
¿Cuánto dinero necesitas? Descubre Multimoney, créditos fácil de tramitar y rápidos de desembolsar, desde 350 hasta $11,000 sin trámites adicionales, sin fiador y sin orden de descuento. En 24 horas tendrás tu cheque en tu casa u oficina. Tendrás entre 48 o 60 meses plazo y puedes pagar de lunes a domingo. Pagar es sencillo, sin fila y con horarios extendidos. Multimoney, tu crédito al instante. Búscanos en nuestra página web y calcula tu cuota.
Pasa el número 20, número 20.
Para trámites del DUI, haz tu cita en línea. Programarla es fácil. Entra a www.dui-mediosb.com. Haz clic en el icono de cita en línea. Llena los datos. Escoge fecha, hora y DUI centro. Confirma por correo y listo. O también hazlo llamando al 2555-1900. DUI Centro. Identificando a El Salvador, Muehlbauer y Registro Nacional de las Personas Naturales.
El fútbol es mi pasión. Desde niño quise estar en las grandes ligas y me esforcé por lograrlo. Entrenando y estudiando a través de internet, mirando y practicando las jugadas de los mejores futbolistas del mundo.
5 megas, línea fija y un Smart TV Samsung de 43 pulgadas. Todo incluido por $40 al mes.
Soy Darwin Serén y soy parte de la nueva generación de El Salvador.